That tattoo. My mom had one just like it. A little butterfly, right? Cute. The words, spoken by Petty Officer First Class Jax Rourke, cut through the sterile tension of the pre-mission briefing room. The 5 other SEALs in his fire team exchanged smirks, a ripple of quiet, condescending laughter that died as quickly as it was born. The target of the comment, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Anya Sharma, offered no reaction. She sat perfectly still, her focus locked on the holographic tactical display in the center of the room, her small frame swallowed by the high-collared flight suit. Her posture was a study in economic stillness, a quiet rebuke to the loud arrogance filling the space around her. The only thing that broke her uniform's clean lines was the object of Rourke's scorn, the delicate, intricate lines of a single bird's wing and a solitary star, just visible on her wrist where the cuff of her sleeve ended. She made a minute adjustment on her data pad, her fingers moving with the unthinking grace of a concert pianist. The silence that followed Rourke's comment stretched, becoming heavier and more awkward with each passing second. He had expected a retort, a defensive justification, anything to latch onto. Her profound lack of response was more irritating than any argument. He saw her as an outsider, a glorified video gamer sent to support real warriors, and her silence felt like a dismissal of his entire world. If you believe true strength is proven, not proclaimed, type proven below. Rourke, unable to let the silence stand, pressed on. Look, no offense, Chief, he said, the words dripping with the very offense he claimed to avoid. But this isn't some supply run over friendly territory. We're going deep. Things get kinetic. We need someone in the sky who gets it. Someone who's been there. A drone jockey watching a screen from 5 miles up isn't going to cut it when the lead starts flying. He gestured vaguely at her, a sweeping motion that encompassed her slight build, her focused calm, her perceived fragility. The other operators shifted uncomfortably, their earlier amusement souring into complicity. They were the tip of the spear, legends in their own right, and their support pilot was a quiet, unassuming woman who looked like she'd be more at home in a library than the cockpit of the advanced gunship they were relying on. Their assumptions, seeded by Rourke's prejudice, began to take root. In the back of the room, Captain Miller, the base commander, stood with his arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. He watched the exchange without intervention, his eyes moving from Rourke's smug certainty to Sharma's unshakable composure. When the briefing officer asked her to confirm the infiltration vector, her reply was crisp, devoid of any emotion. Vector confirmed. Ready on my mark. Her voice was calm, professional, and final. It was the voice of competence, and in that room full of loud certainty, it was the quietest sound of all. The mission, as missions often do, fell apart with shocking speed. The intel was bad. The target location was a hornet's nest, a well-planned ambush that swallowed the SEAL team whole. The first desperate radio call came from Rourke, his voice stripped of its earlier swagger, replaced by the jagged edge of panic. Broadsword 1, this is Trident Lead. We are pinned down. Pinned down. Heavy contact, multiple positions. We are taking casualties. Need immediate air support and evac. Danger close. I repeat, danger close. The comms channel dissolved into a cacophony of gunfire, explosions, and strained breathing. Back in the Tactical Operations Center, the controlled environment became a vortex of frantic energy. Officers shouted updates. Analysts frantically tried to reroute assets, but the storm front that had been a secondary concern was now a raging beast, grounding their primary air support. All eyes turned to the one remaining asset available, the experimental stealth gunship piloted by the quiet woman they had all dismissed. Sharma, however, was an island of absolute calm in the raging sea of chaos. Her expression never changed. Her breathing remained slow and even. Her hands moved across the controls of her remote cockpit station, a dance of practiced, methodical precision that was almost hypnotic to watch. She wasn't watching a screen. She was connected to the machine, her senses extended thousands of miles away into the storm-racked canyon where 6 men were about to die. She acknowledged the desperate call with a simple, Trident Lead, this is Archangel. I'm inbound. Stand by. Her voice, transmitted through their helmet comms, was so serene it was unnerving. On the tactical display, her call sign, a single, angelic icon, began to move with impossible speed toward the flashing red icons of the beleaguered team. She wasn't flying around the storm. She was flying through it, using the turbulence and low visibility as a shield. The operators in the TOC watch her telemetry, their faces a mixture of horror and awe. "She's going too low," one muttered. "The wind shear in that canyon will tear her apart." But she didn't fly like a normal pilot. She used the gusts of wind, dipping a wing to ride across current, using the terrain to mask her approach until the last possible second. Then, a catastrophic systems failure warning flashed across the screen. A lucky shot, or perhaps just the brutal weather, had crippled one of her engines. The gunship icon began to fall. A collective gasp filled the TOC. But Sharma's voice came over the comms again, still unervingly calm. "Archangel has sustained engine damage. Initiating emergency landing procedure." Rourke and his men, huddled behind a rock outcropping, looked up to see the sleek, dark shape of the gunship fall out of the churning clouds, silent and dead. It wasn't crashing, it was gliding. A deadstick landing in a hurricane in a box canyon. It was impossible. The craft descended like a falling leaf, its silent rotors auto-rotating, and landed in a sliver of space between two rock walls with a whisper of displaced air, its landing skids touching down so gently it didn't even kick up dust. The rear ramp was already down. "Get on," Sharma's voice commanded. The SEALs scrambled aboard, dragging their wounded, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. They were trained for the unbelievable, but this was something else entirely. This was a violation of the laws of physics, a miracle of skill and nerve that simply should not have happened. Rourke was the last one on, turning to look toward the cockpit. He saw Sharma's face illuminated by the green glow of her instruments, her eyes scanning the readouts, her hands already working to coax the remaining engine back to life. There was no sign of stress, no fear, just an all-encompassing focus. The arrogance that had defined him just hours before had been sandblasted away, leaving behind a raw, hollowed-out sense of awe and shame. He was a warrior who had faced down death 100 times, but in that moment, he knew he was in the presence of something far beyond his understanding. The silence on the flight back was absolute, broken only by the whine of the single straining engine and the quiet groans of the wounded. Each man was lost in his own thoughts, replaying the impossible landing, the calm voice, the sheer, undeniable competence that had plucked them from certain death. When they landed back at the forward operating base, the ground crews were already waiting, their faces etched with disbelief. The story had already begun to travel. Captain Miller was on the tarmac, standing ramrod straight as the SEALs disembarked, looking more like survivors of shipwreck than an elite combat unit. He ignored them. His attention was fixed on the cockpit of the battered gunship as Sharma went through her post-flight shutdown sequence. When she finally emerged, pulling off her helmet, Miller walked directly to her, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Aircraft qualification. AH-77 Wraith, experimental platform, lead test pilot. Combat hours, 4,582. Awards, Distinguished Flying Cross with V for Valor, Bronze Star, Air Medal with 14 oak leaf clusters." The list went on, a litany of elite service that made Rourke's own impressive record feel insignificant. Miller let the information sink in before he spoke again, his voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing Rourke and the other SEALs to lean in. "That maneuver she just performed, Petty Officer? The one that saved your lives? It has a name in the 160th. They call it the Archangel's Perch. It's a theoretical, last resort procedure for landing a crippled aircraft in an impossible space. Only 3 pilots have ever attempted it in a live combat scenario. The other 2 are memorialized on a wall at Fort Campbell. Chief Sharma is the one who wrote the procedure." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, he pointed to Sharma's wrist, where the small tattoo was now clearly visible. "And that tattoo, you thought it was a butterfly. Look closer." Rourke squinted, his stomach churning. It wasn't a butterfly. It was the stylized, swept-back wing of a raptor, and above it a single, 5-pointed star. "That is the unit crest for Operation Nightfall," Miller explained, his voice thick with reverence. "A mission that is still classified at the highest levels. The star represents her co-pilot, Captain Eva Rostova. Their aircraft was hit, just like tonight. Rostova was killed instantly. Sharma flew that bird for 200 miles through enemy airspace, holding the cyclic stick with one hand while using the other to keep pressure on her friend's wounds, hoping for a miracle that would never come. Your mother's tattoo may be a symbol of beauty, Rourke. Hers is a monument. It is a promise. It is a legacy of sacrifice that you could not begin to comprehend. Miller then turned his back on the humbled SEAL and faced Sharma. He drew himself to his full height, his posture becoming rigid, formal. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute, a gesture of profound respect from a senior officer to a junior, a public acknowledgement of greatness that silenced the entire flight line. Welcome back, Chief. Your professionalism is an example to us all. The story of Sharma's landing became legend. It spread through the base not like wildfire, but like a rising tide, a slow, inevitable truth that washed over every barracks, every mess hall, every briefing room. The SEALs, to their credit, became the story's most ardent keepers. Rourke, in particular, repeated the tale to anyone who would listen, never omitting his own foolish arrogance. It was his penance, his way of honoring the quiet professional who had saved him in every sense of the word. His public humiliation became a powerful lesson. The unofficial name for the most difficult landing zone on the base's training simulator was changed from the Devil's Anvil to the Perch. New pilots would be told the story, shown the telemetry data from Sharma's flight, and taught that the ultimate measure of a warrior was not in the volume of their voice, but in the precision of their actions. A few days after the mission, Rourke found Sharma in the mess hall, sitting alone, reading a book. He walked to her table holding 2 cups of coffee, his hands trembling slightly. He placed one in front of her. "Chief," he began, his voice barely audible, stripped of all its former bravado. "There's no excuse for how I acted. I was wrong. I made assumptions. Thank you. For my life. For the lives of my men." Sharma looked up from her book, her gaze calm and analytical. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. She simply nodded, accepting the coffee. "We're all on the same team, petty officer," she said, her voice soft. "Just do your job. I'll do mine. Stay safe out there." There was no gloating, no "I told you so." Her forgiveness was as efficient and professional as her flying. It was all he could have hoped for, and more than he deserved. A year later, Captain Miller stood before a new class of operators, fresh-faced and brimming with the unshakable confidence of the young and elite. Behind him, on the wall of the main briefing room, hung a large, framed photograph. It was a satellite image, stark and clear, showing the H-77 Wraith sitting perfectly nestled in the impossibly tight confines of the canyon floor, a testament in metal and shadow. Miller used it as his opening lesson. "Take a good look at that photograph," he commanded, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Memorize it. That is what competence looks like. It does not boast. It does not swagger. It does not make assumptions based on what someone looks like or what gender they are or the tattoos on their skin." That landing was executed by a pilot who was underestimated by the very men she was sent to protect. Those men are alive today because her skill was not dependent on their approval. Her professionalism was not swayed by their prejudice. He let his gaze sweep across the new faces, impressing the weight of his words upon them. Your value here is not in the stories you tell about yourselves. It is in the actions you take when everything has gone wrong. Remember that. Remember the Archangel's perch in another part of the base. Newly promoted Chief Petty Officer Rourke was briefing his own SEAL team. His leadership style was legendary, demanding, precise, and utterly intolerant of ego. "I don't care how fast you can run or how much you can lift," he told his men, his voice hard as iron. "I care about what you can do when you're tired, scared, and bleeding. Show me. Don't tell me." The lesson Sharma had taught him had become his creed. True legacy isn't an inscription on a stone or a name in a history book. It is a living, breathing thing, a ripple of influence that continues to spread long after the initial event. Anya Sharma's legacy was not just in her own decorated service record or the classified mission reports bearing her name. It was in the humbled wisdom of a SEAL chief who now taught his men the value of humility. It was in the pilots she now mentored, instilling in them her own philosophy of quiet, relentless competence. It was in a culture slowly shifting away from loud assumptions and toward a deep and abiding respect for demonstrated excellence. Her silence had been a crucible, testing the character of those around her. Her actions were the verdict. She proved that the most powerful statements are not those that are shouted from the rooftops, but those that are written in the language of impossible feats under unbearable pressure in the service of others. Her quiet professionalism had become the new standard, a silent roar that echoed far louder than any boastful words ever could. For more stories where competence triumphs over prejudice and where quiet professionalism defines true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.